Anthropology is sort of a very broad discipline. If you're interested in languages, if you're interested in politics, if you're interested in everything from food and different cuisine to sort of geography and topography, you could be an anthropologist. Anthropology is what you'll find at most universities is the department, and there are actually 4 fields within anthropology. Archaeology is one of those subfields. The example that I give my students all the time is information that's just come to light recently, for example, about Richard III, whose body they found sort of famously a couple of years ago under a parking garage over in Britain. And there was a team of archaeologists who worked on the site, obviously, who discovered the remains. And it's challenging some of the historical record. The historical record, of course, comes to us largely through Shakespeare, who was in the employ of the family that killed Richard III. So you can see a lot of interesting relationships between what gets written down as history and what the archaeological record shows. So I often think of archaeologists as sort of fact checkers who go back and are constantly sort of revising what we consider to be history. One of the things that I like to point out a lot to my students is that for most of human history, the only people who were being written about and the only people who were doing the writing were elites, were sort of the 1%, if you will, to put it in the conversations of today. But archaeology, everybody leaves behind trash. Everybody leaves behind the remains of their house, if they have one. The archaeological record is very democratic in a way. Everybody's represented in some form. And so we can often go back and look at that and say, well, we know that the court of so-and-so, Louis XIV, looked like this, but we didn't know that people living in the suburbs of Paris during that era were doing this other thing, for instance. So I think archaeology has a lot to contribute to history. I think historians ought to pay more attention to the archaeological record personally, but I have a lot of friends that are historians, so I try not to give them too hard a time. The first thing that I would suggest that you do is to take your language studies seriously. I know that was immensely helpful to me as just a person, not just in terms of developing my career. And that's something that people often overlook. They think, I'm going to do history or I'm going to do politics, but the odds are most of history is not sort of predates the United States, for instance, and predates English as we know it today. The other thing I would say is follow current events. There's an old saying that there's nothing new under the sun. I think that's biblical. But that there's nothing new under the sun, which means that a lot of the issues that we see today have direct parallels, or at the very least indirect connections with things that we've seen before, whether it's arguments that we're having right now about income equality and income disparity having their roots in the Gilded Age of this country, or whether it's questions about what it means to be an empire, whether it's a trading empire or whether it's military power in a region that is far from home. We see these things come up over and over again. So, those are things that maybe don't immediately come to mind, but I think are really, really important in terms of your development as a student and as a citizen of the world.